Silva. Just your mic. Thank you.
Thank you. I did.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to this important session dedicated to an important topic, sovereignty or multilateralism in a world in economic change, in a world where crisis is becoming a rule, in a world where we should learn, all of us, how to survive first, then how to transform threats into opportunities. J'ai fait exprès de commencer mon allocution en anglais, parce qu'au Maroc, on parle anglais. Tout comme on parle français, tout comme on parle arabe, espagnol, swahili, hausa, tout comme on parle toutes les langues. Mais ce qui compte, en fait, et c'est une terre d'ouverture, ce qui compte le plus, et le plus important, c'est le travail la main, dans le respect mutuel et dans la prospérité mutuelle. Et c'est cet état d'esprit qu'on se doit de garder tous ensemble au travers, justement, de ce beau panel. Vous me verrez souvent parler en anglais, en honneur au fait que la plupart de nos invités parlent anglais dans ce panel. Si vous avez besoin de traduction, il y a les casques, et je pense que ça doit être juste, en fait, à l'extérieur de la salle. Et sinon, vous êtes les bienvenus. Je ferai avec plaisir aussi l'exercice de retraduction. Merci d'être aussi nombreux, juste après le déjeuner. Ce n'est pas facile. Donc, merci aussi pour votre focus et merci aussi d'être un public aussi engagé. So, I decided actually to not make an introduction. Why to make an introduction when we are all participants, when we are all observers, when we can all see actually the world where we live in today? Prices of energy are booming. Nobody needs to tell us about the need to secure actually energy resources. Problems actually in the global value chain, food security, medical security. What will the future actually be? Digitalization, cybersecurity, threats of terrorism. We know the world where we live in. But guess what? The future doesn't have to be dark. If we all are able to be humble, to sit together on one table, to bring concrete solutions, work hand in hand in a responsible manner, and bring also our contribution to the table. And in this spirit, and in the spirit of the cooperation between the South of the North, we will be bridging this conference. So whenever there is a speaker, or two speakers actually from the North that speaks, and they're welcome to Morocco, the doorway to Africa, there will be always actually a speaker from the South. And whenever there is a speaker from the South, he will be followed actually by a speaker from the North. And my first question will be, and I'm, in respect of the names, I'm using WUVA also. I hope that you are using it. It's very updated. My first question will be to His Excellency, Prime Minister Bertie Ahern, who came directly from Ireland that is hosting actually in a few hours or in a few days the next COP, very engaged in terms of, no? Okay. So very engaged, country is very engaged in terms of energy, that is very engaged in terms of green energy, renewable energy. A country also that is very proud of belonging to a bigger community, which is the European actually Union. And my question will be blunt and will be very direct and link it to the title actually of this conference, multilateralism or sovereignty in today's world. Prime Minister, under your applauses, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, moderator, and can I thank MEDays for having us all here and for the opportunity of speaking at this wonderful conference yet again. I can't help thinking of a few years back when the last public session of conference was held. We would have had a very different agenda. We would have been looking at a period of confidence and I think multilateralism working relatively well and a sense that trade flows were rising fast. China, India, Europe, Latin America, all the blocs were doing very well with a lot of stability. There's the usual problems, but a lot of stability. And even at the start of this year, maybe after COVID, we were looking with a bit of confidence. And I think really at the opening, I just set the scene on this a little bit, that things have changed so much. And of course, there was a lot of people looking inward and looking away from multilateralism. I believe in multilateralism. I think it's the best way of dealing with our issues and dealing with our problems. But now we're faced, more or less globally, not everywhere, but high interest rates, high inflation, high energy costs, feeding into higher food costs, and effectively higher everything across the globe. And this is creating a huge amount of stress on budgets, a huge amount of pressure on revenues for governments. Of course, then people look more insular, they look away from multilateral issues. And then with the war in Ukraine and the conflicts elsewhere in the world, which all, suck, create expenditure and suck revenues, and this creates an enormous problem. So I think we're on a scene where things are very different. And as you said, on a positive note, we always have to look to the future, and we have to try and create the conditions. And this is the point we were talking about outside, that the COP conference is next week, but and not with us, but that would be 40,000 people looking at green energies. And on the positive note, this is where probably the big part of the future is, because of climate change, because we've all learned very quickly the effects of climate change. All you have to do is turn on your media links any day of the week, and you see some part of the world that's suffering that. And that is creating its own opportunity of generating new industries, new innovation, new enterprises, new entrepreneurs, enormous sums of money moving to that end compared to when we were here a few years ago at the last conference. So I think, moderator, we face a different time. I think I come from a European perspective, not to say too much about that, but multilateralism is very important for us. I think there's been the war in Ukraine has brought a very tight-knit European community to deal with the effects of it, and the effects are many. No need to go through to all of those. But from a trade point of view, an economic point of view, huge pressures. I mean, there are pressures on governments and their budgets that were not conceivable at the start of this calendar year. So I think if we look, we have to try and deal with this two ways. We have to deal with the short-term issue, which is how we work our way through, for the first time in 30 years, higher inflation, higher interest rates. I think of the Bank of England today, we're putting up their interest rates by 0.75. That's what was being indicated in FT. That would be the highest back for almost a quarter of a century. Inflation figures around the world are back where they were in 93, 94, in Europe before the difficulties of economic monetary union. So the challenges are huge. To keep your moderator agenda, the positives, we look to where they are. And I think for trade and business, we now must move our mindsets to green energies, to new innovations, to new opportunities. And that's what 40,000 people will be doing next week when they meet. So I think that's the scene that we must set.
Thank you. Thank you, Prime Minister. Challenges are pinpointed. Challenges are clear. Now it's about how to tackle them. And you said that multilateralism is inevitable, and we kind of all agree actually on that. Just to have a different perspective and to obey to the logic of this panel, let us actually ask the question now next to Mr. Jibril Fall, GK Partners. Mr. Fall, how can we actually tackle together, hand in hand, in multilateralism, but also in respect of the sovereignty of the nations, and combine actually those two big challenges as such in concrete manner on the field to transform the current challenges into opportunities?
Thank you very much, Amin, Mr. Moderator, and thank you, Prime Minister and the organizers. My view would be an unconventional one. I think the challenges and the tensions between integration and sovereignty and many of these national challenges that almost jeopardizes multilateralism have virtually nothing to do with the rationality of arguments for and against. I think it is something more fundamental we often tend to forget because we think we are sophisticated. And that is a psychology of humans then reflected in nation states wanting to preserve a sense of otherness. If you look at the benefits of integration, they are so obvious and so rational. Why is it that anybody would oppose it? It's because humans do not live on rationality alone. I lived through Brexit, and we said you are cutting your nose to spite your face. It leaves you both bloody and ugly. But in some cases, people want to be that, just to show that they are different. So I think the technocrats need to begin to emphasize a little bit more on what I call the psychology of nation states, so that they are able to help us and nation states to focus on the things that are of mutual benefit. Having experience in New York and in Geneva, working in the backgrounds on multilateral agreements, I ended up developing what I call the agreement implementation matrix. I saw member states, nation states, who would want to do something, but would not want their name to be associated with doing it. Isn't that odd? But that is the situation. So we had to devise a matrix where we can encourage people to show that doing it alone is good, even one doesn't sign off. And my thinking is we need to emphasize a bit more on that softer part of the heavy politics of integration and sovereignty. Thank you.
Thank you, Jibril. Thank you, Professor Fall. Thank you also for all of you for respecting actually the time. My job is being easy this afternoon. So again, in the same spirit, moving to Zoran Jalewski, Your Excellency. Little bit of inside information. Mr. Jalewski was one of the forefathers of what is today the WTO. He attended the Marrakesh conference, you know, the act of birth of the WTO. In a world that is today in total mutation, to not say in chaos, and where order needs to be brought, did the WTO actually today, in your opinion, meet with the intentions of the forefathers? And your applauses, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Back in 1994 and 1995, when WTO was established, I was a young diplomat. And I remember the expectations of WTO and multilateral trading systems were very high. We were saying that we have established the third pillar of the world economical system. And Marrakesh was a place where we celebrated the multilateral trading system, and we achieved a very deep integration process of trade policies. That process was important for all of us. We looked forward, and we were looking on the future importance of WTO. But unfortunately, the multilateral trading system faced challenges, and the last multilateral trading round is not giving results. And as Director General of WTO, Renato Ruggiero, once mentioned, if we want to have a multilateral trading system moving in good direction, it has to go in parallel with regional trading system, with regional agreements. But since the multilateral trading system is not producing what the international community, what national economies, what the businesses are requiring, we are witnessing now the proliferation of the regional trade agreements. When I say proliferation of regional trade agreements, we have to say that they have a multi-dimensions. First, their number is getting bigger and bigger, so we have more and more of those regional agreements. Second, the territory which they are covering is permanently increasing. We are having African continental trade, free trade area, which covers whole continent of Africa. We have economic European area, EEA, which covers almost all European Union member states and also EFTA member states. Now the countries from my region would like to join that area. It shows that countries are getting involved and they like to have more free trade. because it's beneficial for our economies. And also, if we look at those agreements, we'll see they are deeper and deeper. They're not just about trade in goods, but also freedom of providing of services, also avoiding double taxation, protection of investments. Even some of them are going towards a common currency. It shows you that the need for economic integration around the world is bigger. It's only the way how we'll approach. Either we go through the multilateral trading system or we'll go in a regional level. The business community, the business strategies of the companies are global. We cannot avoid that.
Thank you. Are we in need of Marrakesh too?
Definitely, we need Marrakesh too. We need the current multilateral round of negotiations to provide comprehensive agreement which will not just liberalize further the trade, but also include the important issues which are important for the developing world, for developed world, for all countries, because the global economy, now this crisis showed that we need to cooperate together. The challenges what we are facing, we can deal with them only if we work together.
Excellent. Thank you. And they really deserve to be applauded. So now actually we are moving to Mr. Antonio da Silva. First of all, bem-vindo ao Marrocos, meu amigo.
Muito obrigado, muchas gracias. Es un placer estar acá con usted, la organización, también con todos los demás.
El placer es nosotros y bienvenidos en Marruecos. Ahora tenemos muchas cosas que podemos desarrollar juntos, seguridad alimentaria, seguridad energética y de agua, pero como la integración económica en nuestro continente, en África, pero también el puente entre África, Europa y el mundo pueden contribuir a la realización de la prosperidad y de la seguridad que necesitamos todos en un mundo en crisis.
Okay, muy bien, yo creo que es una pregunta muy buena, pero yo no sé si los demás hablan español todos, entonces le voy a contestar en inglés. Well, I think that it's actually a very pertinent question since the challenges that we are facing today at a world scale, they need to have an answer at the same level, meaning that through the potential that we see in continents, and of course I'll speak later on also about my country, that we have a huge opportunity during this crisis to switch the way that we look to those same opportunities where risk mitigation, it is a big issue, but when you compare a war which is an effective big risk towards the ones that are associated with some countries in Africa, because there is also this perception that Africa is a country, while we have 54 states, member states in the continent. And all of those countries have their own specific challenges, but they also have their own specific opportunities. And mitigating risk should also look at how to address those same opportunities in a scale way where the opportunities are given to those member states of the continent where there's huge potential from the landlocked countries to the ones that are coastal. And Angola is a coastal country that for the last 5 years has shown that it's possible through improvement of governance, reforms, rule of law, and also through elections to bring forward the kind of stability that the world and investors look for. As a next step, since we need to scale up and since we need to respond to the challenges that our own citizens and expectations that our own citizens have, we need to deliver. So when it comes to deliver and when it comes to opportunities that are created because of the ongoing crisis, there is something that we need all together to bring in is to open doors. So Morocco is a good example of that opening of doors, is a good example of what has been achieved for the last 15 years in an industry like the automotive one, and can be replicated, because if you can also consider that Africans are an average of 75% are less than 25 years old, that's huge potential in terms of consumption. So across decades, those same Africans, that some of them want to fly up to Europe, they can be thinking twice, better staying to improve their life conditions through this cooperation that we are willing to create. Of course, there are sectors that Africa has more advantage. The agriculture one, it's a good example. It's a very demanding in terms of workforce, but through the expertise that many of the European countries have, bringing that expertise into Africa, we can respond to the food security challenges that we have. We can improve the quality of life of citizens of Africa. We can also be able to promote a much inclusive world where tourism could probably be one of the ways to exchange and to get to know each other better. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Mr. Da Silva. Mrs. Heike, Dr. Hagmacht. I pronounced it well, right? Yes. Okay, I'm very proud. Thank you. You are the managing director of the CEMED region of the bird. And we decided together actually to ask first question that is not too technical. We will get actually to the funding on the second approach. But whenever we are talking about South-North cooperation, I'm starting with the South because I'm son of the South, so please bear with me. So when we are talking about South-North cooperation, people will say that it's not equilibrated. You know, that it's profiting only to one side, and we all know which side, that it's only creating high-level jobs. Because it's not just about the number of jobs, it's also about high-level jobs, about middle class only in one side, and the value stays in this side. Now, how can we actually change this? Because we just actually listened carefully to the chairman actually of the Angolese Agency of Foreign Investments, and we can only salute Angola for all the effort and the success that it did in bringing investments to the country and changing the brand. I was in Angola in the beginning of the years 2000s, and I returned back actually 10 years or over actually that. Beautiful country, that we invite everybody actually to visit, very positive image, dynamic economy, trying to diversify the economy and not rely only on oil and gas, developing industry and agriculture, and exporting already actually to the neighboring countries and to the world. Very actually beautiful example of rebranding around actually concrete successes. So how can we rebrand also this South-North actually cooperation in a way that is real, that is just, that creates actually opportunities and jobs for everybody? And you can see there is a lot actually of youth in the room. So they are eager to listen to you. And there are applauses, please.
No, thank you very much, and also for inviting me. So I'm a German living in Cairo, so I feel I'm a bit of a daughter of both worlds and don't want to be sort of only looking at one side of the story. But I think maybe just to tell you a little bit about my day today, because I feel seeing is believing about the opportunity. So I started my day with visiting Tanger, as you know, one of the most impressive. It has been the #1 port in Africa, #1 port in Europe, in the Mediterranean. And I just think it was just incredible to see. And I think, you know, they told us, oh, it's a baby port because we only started in 2003. And just to see this acceleration of growth and this acceleration also of not just transshipment, but actually capturing value for Morocco of this transshipment by capturing, you know, industry, global industry, local industry, working on the value chain. I mean, this port alone is now 25% of the Moroccan GDP. So I think I was incredibly impressed to see how trade and how integration can really foster also the Moroccan economy. But now I want to also talk a little bit, you said, where do you see a shift? And I want to start with green, and maybe it's because I'm sort of focusing on green because of the upcoming COP in Egypt. But actually, green is one of the ways where, you know, the African continent, North Africa, Morocco, our hosts today, is a superpower. So this is a renewable energy superpower. You know, speaking of the sun, the wind, you know, and so now, I mean, the global crisis has shown us we need to have diversified solutions. We need to have green solutions going forward. And I think it's fascinating to see how Morocco, how Egypt, how Tunisia, how all of these countries are looking and exporting green energy to Europe. So I think you really see a reversal, that this is an area which can leapfrog in a number of industries, the European and other continents, in terms of exporting green. And I think the sexy project that everyone is speaking about is green hydrogen. And again, this is the region this is the continent where green hydrogen can really be efficiently developed. And I think honestly that this is a huge part of the energy, and we all learned unfortunately how important energy is these days, even more than ever, of the energy future of the world. So starting my day at Tanger Met and thinking about the green future that this continent can export to Europe, I'm actually very positive about, you know, the future of the relationship between different regional integrations. And so looking forward, we do see, yes, we have to work together, but also there are new opportunities coming up, in particular for this region.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for speaking as a true daughter, actually, of the South and the North, and building the bridge, because that's what we want to do today. You know, we want to build a bridge, actually, together. And you helped me, actually, building a bridge toward Mr. Da Silva, you know. Mrs. Heike spoke in a very clear manner about the importance of one port, the port of Tanger Med, that started as a vision, the vision of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, for Morocco, for Africa, but also for the Mediterranean and the world. Today it's a reality. And around this bridge that is connecting the AE1, Asia-Europe 1, actually, maritime highway, and the AFR, the highway actually going from Europe to Africa, and also the one actually connecting transatlantic, you know, port that you can easily reach Santos in Brazil in less than 10 days and go to Charleston in less than 7 days, actually in the US, go to Ireland, for example, in less than 3 days as well, you know, just to give an order of perspective. Such a port is not just helping with the logistics or global trade, and it does. It's also helping with the global sourcing today, and we all know the problems actually of shortage in international sourcing. It's also helping create new economies that we never thought about developing. You know, few before the port, to make it very easy, we were exporting actually mineral products, and we were exporting also agriculture. Today, our biggest exports are what? Are automotive, followed actually by other sectors of higher value, such as chemical industry and transformation actually of the fertilizer. So ports and projects like that makes your dream actually become true, and it makes you said something very beautiful, seeing is believing. So automatically, how can we actually transpose actually this experience in other African countries? And I'm talking this time actually to Mr. Antonio as the chairman of the Special Economic Zone, you know, an industrial zone. How can port and the Special Economic Zone change actually the layover of a region, not just of a country?
Alors, comme je parle portugais, je veux passer aussi à
répondre en
français. C'est tout à fait une très bonne question, car l'expérience qu'on a dû constater ici au Royaume du Maroc, c'est un très bon exemple qu'avec les conditions propices, on arrive à établir ce résultat. Et l'Angola est un pays qui n'est pas enclavé. On a aussi des conditions pour avoir sur place de ports de eau profonde. On est en train de construire quelques infrastructures dans ce sens, et surtout pour servir avec la relation avec un pays très riche que c'est le Congo, la RDC, où la plupart de matières premières sont exportées sans une valeur ajoutée. En tenant compte que tous les opérateurs, soit les opérateurs qui font le transport, la logistique, le développement industriel, l'agriculture, ont besoin de voir à quel prix ils sont en train d'exercer ces affaires. Et surtout, si on veut minimiser le coût, on pourrait répliquer certaines opérations au dehors de notre marché, de notre base, et trouver des solutions pour couvrir régionalement les besoins de pays comme l'Angola et aussi de la région de la SADC, où on a plus que 450 millions d'habitants. Et en faisant ça, on assure notre croissance, on assure aussi un améliorement de conditions de vie et le développement des autres pays. Et surtout, quand on parle de l'intégration de l'Afrique, il faut en tenir en compte qu'on doit réduire au maximum les asymétries. Et en faisant ça, on va pouvoir arriver à des résultats communs, expectables, et aussi qui nous assurent qu'avec les crises politiques et l'instabilité, on va réduire aussi ses conséquences. Merci.
Merci. Restez avec moi, gardez le micro. Alors, on parle souvent en fait de coopération entre le Sud et le Nord, mais quid aussi de la coopération Sud-Sud? Je prends un exemple très clair et encore une fois, Heike m'avait tendu la perche et tu viens de le faire également, cher ami. Donc, le Maroc a développé une expertise dans l'automobile, mais aussi dans l'aéronautique. Il y a un besoin qui est réel sur plusieurs pays africains. Comment justement transposer ce cluster avec une logique d'adaptation et de création de valeur locale, disons en Angola, parce qu'on parle ici d'Angola. Comment peut-on transférer le savoir et compétences?
Encore une très bonne question, parce que je suis le chairman de l'agence d'investissement de l'Angola, mais je suis aussi le président du conseil d'administration de la zone économique spéciale de l'Angola. C'est-à-dire qu'on a dû associer l'une et l'autre pour réduire la bureaucratie. On arrivait à le faire, je suis en train de parler à moi-même, mais il faut aussi constater ça sur place dans ce qui concerne les impressions des investisseurs. On a réussi à obtenir beaucoup mieux de résultats en considérant qu'on est là depuis 4 ans. Et ces résultats nous permettent, avec beaucoup d'assurance, de dire que si une société marocaine est intéressée de se déplacer son opération en Angola pour monter une ligne de montage de camions, ou soit que ce soit, on peut le faire dans très court temps. On a des conditions et on a le besoin parce que les pays comme l'Angola, à cause de les routes et les corridors qui doivent être disponibles pour se connecter dans le cadre de la zone libre de commerce interafricaine. On a besoin d'avoir ce genre des infrastructures et ce genre de services. Alors, l'installation d'une usine automotive, c'est surtout un besoin et aussi un business case que je peux considérer déjà de succès.
Magnifique. Et on pourrait même en fait réfléchir à une logique de paramétrage et non pas de transposage tel que. C'est-à-dire aujourd'hui on a un cluster qui est vraiment actif. Il y a de cela quelques années on avait partagé une expertise avec 2 pays frères, le Sénégal et la Côte d'Ivoire. On en discutait tout à l'heure sous forme en fait de CKD avec une logique d'assemblage final en fait sur place, mais d'adaptation aussi. Je rentrerai pas dans les détails, mais là je parle des types d'amortisseurs, de la nature en fait des transmissions et ainsi de suite. L'Angola est un pays qui est en train de développer une bonne en fait secteur agricole. Il a besoin de tracteurs qu'il importe en majorité. On a le savoir-faire, ensemble on peut travailler ensemble, dans l'ouverture aussi par rapport à nos partenaires du Nord.
Ouais, alors monsieur le modérateur, je vous remercie déjà pour la diplomatie économique vers l'Angola que vous êtes en train de faire et j'encourage aussi que toutes ces personnes qui sont ici, tous ces monsieur et madame qui sont ici, que ça renseigne plus de l'Angola, parce que c'est vraiment un cas de succès et on a besoin de la capillarité pour grandir. On va le faire ensemble et en faisant ça, on va pouvoir avoir une Afrique de l'avenir beaucoup mieux que celle d'aujourd'hui. Merci.
Magnifique. Je pense en fait c'est le rôle du Maroc, un rôle que c'est dans nos valeurs, c'est dans nos gènes de toujours faire de l'advocacy pour nos chers frères africains qui nous le rendent aussi très très bien. Donc un devoir et une réalité. Alors je prépare déjà en fait le panel. On parle ici en fait d'électricité et on parle automatiquement de lapsus révélateur. On parle automatiquement d'industrie automobile et d'industrie tout court de l'Afrique. Qui dit industrie dit automatiquement besoin d'électricité. D'accord, une électricité qui doit être suffisante en fait pour couvrir les besoins, mais aussi un coût qui est acceptable et sans disruption. Donc, I will switch to English again, doing the gymnastic. So, I'm preparing actually the room. Electricity for the needs of African nations, in what way, what form, what investments, and in the same time, electricity and green energy as a source of exports for Africa, but also filling the needs of Europe, since we are talking about Europe, hence actually our dear panelists. So, we need to think electricity to Europe, that will be my dear friend Zoran. We need to think probably actually Africa and the development of African actually electrical grid and satisfy the needs. And here I'm thinking about my dear friend Jibril. And automatically the political actually frame to think about all that. And of course, the funding. And you guess, of course, who will be intervening on each aspect. Mr. Zoran.
Thank you very much. The economic development is extremely important for our people, for our nations. But also at the same time, we have to have a partnership with the private sector. Because the private sector is the sector which can help us to deliver those needs to our people. We are witnessing a huge development in the research, in the private sector, new technologies. As well, the private sector has enough financing to do the project. So we need to develop the partnership between the governments and private sector in order to achieve those goals. Yesterday here in this room, it was stated during the opening session, important of public-private partnership in achieving of many infrastructure, but also goals of our societies. It's no coincidence why when United Nations developed the Sustainable Developing Goals, they asked the partnership of the private sector in achieving those goals. Nowadays, in this new contemporary economy, we cannot rely just on the governments or cooperation between different governments. We need to include the private sector. And I believe there is a lot of potential for financing and involvement of the private sector in achieving all those goals, as well as to move towards better conditions for our people. Europe needs energy. The technology is changing. And we need to, Morocco is an example where production of electricity and hydrogen is on a very competitive price. So $2.6, as we mentioned, it's 2.5, which is excellent. We need to look at your experience, how you have achieved, and why not it's time maybe you to export your technology to Europe. Also, what's very important, Africa is going to have 2.5 million inhabitants, people, by 2050. Most of them young. 38 out of, according to United Nations, 38 out of 40 states in the world with the youngest population by 2050 will be from Africa. That's huge potential. We need to work together to develop the capacity, those young people, to embrace the new technology and also to get involved in research and development. That is extremely important, and what the continent is needing, but also Europe. As you see, our population is aging. So Africa will play in 20 years, 30 years from now, different role. So we need to prepare Africa for that moment.
Thank you for this very rich, actually, intervention and mutually respectful. I want actually to return to this expression. Morocco can export technology to Europe. I was very touched by that because it was something that we couldn't think about it actually just decades ago. And today it's a reality. We are already, for those that doesn't know, we are the only African country that exports in continuous way green electricity to Europe, because others do it, but in an intermittent way. Thanks to huge investments in the wind and the solar and the water actually dams and the green energy in general in Morocco, and thanks to the high vision of His Majesty. And even actually the green mix today in Morocco in terms of production is very close from 50%, and that's the objective to overpass in a very short time. And we did it. But we did it also in a very competitive way, and you said it very clearly, 2.5, that's an international benchmark actually to meet, and we are even developing new technologies in terms of the use of green hydrogen, actually automatically, you know, electricity plus water, electrolysis gives you green hydrogen, just to put it very easy. But in turbines locally and produce the electricity, which is something that we can work on together. Either the export of the green hydrogen, if actually the logistics challenges are met, or the export of green electricity, and the grid is there already. Funding is very important about this kind of projects. Working on demand-based, on what we call a pull approach and not a push approach, is very important and very dear to foreign investors, who will be listening to Mrs. Heike on that, and with great interest, of course. The political frame is very important also to be reviewed in a way to secure actually the interest of the South and the North. But before that, I would like actually to move to Professor Jibril Fall. Jibril, my dear friend, we talked about the needs of Europe in terms of renewable energy, in terms of diversification of sources of energy, either raw energy, green energy, or electrical. But what about Africa? Can we think about an inter-African grid? Can we think about, you know, projects by countries? What part of green energy actually in the mix? And to secure the needs of Africans in the cities, but also of the industrial growth that we all need to create employment.
Thank you very much. The example you gave about trade between Europe and Morocco gives us a hint, in my view, as to what the African energy solution can be. I live in the United Kingdom, and several months ago, I was looking at the trade figures. And when I saw Morocco, one of the biggest imports from Morocco to the United Kingdom was aeronautical services. Sure. Now, what that tells me is to break the mold of the old metropolitan economies being serviced by the rest of the world. The rest of the world, and in this case Africa, need to set their own new ambition. And the ambition need to be big and mighty. So who would have thought that United Kingdom would be importing aeronautical services from Morocco? So we need to have that shift to the extent China's doing it, and then you have a shift change. In Africa now, in most cases, we are so far away from that, in that energy poverty is a huge problem. So we're not even talking about sufficiency, we're talking of energy poverty to the level that it begins to affect the human rights of people. Because if you don't have energy these days, you don't have access to technology, and by definition, you are excluded from many. Then we take another hint from Africa as to the things that Africa has done well in the area of industrial development. In my view, a pluralistic approach is the only way because of the huge need. That is, several things must be tried and done. We have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It is now reality, the Secretariat is on. To my mind, the talk should be over, it's just doing and doing, with a tolerance of some failure. The mini-grid...
What challenges from your experience are today actually preventing us from applying this agenda on the field?
Several. One of them is this so-called monolithic approach, that this is the solutions, these are the broad solutions. It is never true. I think it was George Bernard Shaw, a good Irishman, who told us that the reasonable man, he said man, the reasonable man sees a situation that's difficult and he changes his way to cope. The unreasonable man sees the situation and says the situation must change. He said, therefore, progress is dictated by unreasonable people. So what it means is the convention must be broken. Mobile money is an example of African innovation, and still African countries are the leaders in the world. And when they did it, Kenya with M-Pesa, it looked impossible and unreasonable. Same thing with the story of Celtel with Mo Ibrahim and mobile phones. At the time, people were saying, you don't even have electricity, you don't have landlines. You want to set up a satellite for a mobile phone? But it's that unreasonableness that we need to break this mold in energy and other areas. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Professor Jibril Fall, OBE, author of the British Empire, distinguished speaker. You mentioned actually the UK, and post-Brexit, Morocco, as many people actually know, have signed an advantageous actually also agreement with the UK, facilitating but also enhancing the exchanges with the United Kingdom. And there is projects also on different elements, aeronautics, I agree, automotive, medical also, but also in the export of green energy and green electricity. British BP is already a part of the investments in the Moroccan, in the south of the country actually right now, in the Moroccan south. So thank you very much for that. It seems that electricity is one of, and the green energy is one of the key challenges here, key focus points, key opportunities also of development and cooperation together, since Europe needs it, since the North in general needs it, since the South can provide it. Now, how can we fund that? And of course, my question is to Dr. Heike Hagemacht.
Thank you. I always think of, maybe because you've mentioned, all of you mentioned Morocco's advances in sort of car advancements, in automotive industry. So I actually also think about, and just to indulge me for a minute, so I'm German, I'm an engineer, so let me just explain a little bit that I think financing is not so much different from actually building a car. And actually financing that works is also not so much different than a car that's really successfully working. And since I'm in Morocco, in an automotive hub of the world, I think this is sort of a metaphor that may be quite important. So for example, you know, you need to have the right kind of fuel for the engine to work. So you need to have, you make sure, do you need long-term financing? Do you need a lot of octane? Do you need short-term local liquidity? So you really need to tailor what the car needs. But if the car is an accident and you don't have an airbag, then of course, you know, it doesn't matter how much fuel you have, you know, your car is ruined. So you may need an insurance product. You may need something that helps you buffer in the bad times for your investments. Then if you look at, you want to, you know, move to the next level, you want to shift a gear, you want to see how, you know, you can accelerate. So you may want to have a financing that takes a bit more risk with you, but also takes a bit more upside. So maybe some equity financing. So I think there's a lot of elements that need to come together to finance whatever the sort of risk profile is that you want to finance. And I think, okay, I work for a development bank, so we provide some part of both the long-term financing, the risk mitigants, but without the rest of the banking sector, without the rest of the equity sector, we will not be able to really tailor-make something that works for the industry that you need. I mean, 5 years ago, people thought, you know, renewable financing, this cannot be done commercially. And it could be after a while when all the partners came together with the right mix, with all the parts of the cars, with the right regulation. You also don't want to have like the road signs and blockages. So I think the key on financing is not just the money, it's not just the liquidity, but it's actually the expertise from all the elements, the expertise on the regulator side, the expertise from domestic, international, patient, risky, fast and slow money coming together. I think this is really something that will trigger the next phase of financing, and be it green hydrogen, be it something else, that, you know, is really needs innovation. I think all these elements need to come together. Thank you.
Dankeschön. Don't worry, I will not speak in German. So, thank you, Mrs. Heike. Thank you for the metaphor. I will keep it with your permission, with the car, because there is a process that needs to be there. Beautiful. And in the same time, there is a logic there. And one of the best ways how to develop actually truck building companies is to have the demand. When you have the demand that is structured, you know the quality, you know the time. When you need to deliver, you know the lead time. You can easily define actually what areas you need to complete in order to have the right process of production. So I hear you very well, and I'm sure actually that the message was very clear to the room. And of course, Prime Minister, the question actually, the political question is for you. You know, we are talking about a new model of cooperation, you know, far away from ideologies, but a model of cooperation that is respectful for the South and the aspirations of the people of the South and the sovereignty of the countries of the South, 54 countries of Africa, and in the same time about a model that satisfies also the urgent needs of our European friends, mutually building prosperity, transfer of knowledge, creation of a middle class, a dynamic middle class, valuing also creation of value in the two sides at the end of the day. How can we actually secure that throughout, you know, cultural but also political frame?
I think the circumstances usually drive the decision process, and when you get the climate of need. And the reality is in Europe, about 75% of the energy was coming from Russia. By the end of this decade, if you believe the political persuasion, that'll be very little, but let's just not get into that debate, but let's leave it for that. Well, that means 75% has to come from somewhere else. And I think that it's not going to come within the European Union, or very little of it. Renewables will, of course, play a significant part, as they have done, and we've just heard that financing. I recall being at conferences, you know, less than a decade ago, where it was impossible to get finance for renewables. That wave power, even for the innovation of looking at wave and wind power, was not something that was taught. So I think the imperative now is that the decisions have to be made to try and make things happen. The relationship, I think, with the African Union, with the European Union, for many years now, there's been very good dialogue. And I think the opportunity, we heard it yesterday afternoon, as you said earlier, that with energy, there is an enormous opportunity. And I agree, I don't think money will be the issue. I don't think investment will be the issue. I think it's an enormous opportunity for Africa. Working with the private sector, let's be honest, I think you need the technologists, wherever they come from, whatever part of the world, that can bring this together in a systematic way that can deregulate. You will not get my experience, and from many years, my experience, you will not get the investment if the bureaucracy is just unworkable. They want a streamlined system of being able to invest, being able to get support for their project, political support, which is your point, and then being able to create the opportunity. I believe the opportunity is there. It's there now. The political decisions have been made about the energy supply, gas and energy. Also, in hydrogen, I think all the decisions have been politically made. So now it's a matter of getting the vehicle that makes it work. And I think we've heard how in Angola, how you're making that work. But I think that the system of bringing the money, the technology, or maybe the technology first and then the money is going to be imperative. It's not there today. Let's be frank about it. It's not there. But it's not that it's not needed in the short term. It's this decade. So it's a relatively short term in both economic and political terms. So I think it is that cooperation between Africa, cooperation with the European Union, bringing the international money, and bringing a regulatory system that would be attractive for large-scale investments, because let's be frank about this, we're talking here about really large-scale investments. If we're only getting 1 or 2% of the energy supply, it's not really going to have so I think this is really a good opportunity. All the bad times, yes, but the good times are to find the solution to this. And I think it's the next 3-5 years is that opportunity.
Excellent. You got your answer from the public, Prime Minister. So the public actually is applauding and approving what you are saying. May I be frank? And we are all franks actually here. I 100% agree with you, and we all do. You know, times of challenges bring also opportunities, right? For those that stand for it, people of value, we hope, people of good morale, but people also that work hard and are able to bring creative solutions. Europe right now, as economic union and political union, is having two big challenges, among many, but two big challenges. We spoke about the energy challenge. There is also the food challenge. It's no secret to anyone that the war right now have brought many European countries to refresh Cold War practices, such as keeping food security inventories. We all know that. Problem is, there was already disruption in the value chains of food. And if you are going to keep a food inventory for 5 years, where there is not already enough food in the world, so you're creating more disruption than what is happening. Hence what? You need to diversify your sources actually of supply. Africa is the only, it was said actually by one of my friends and colleagues, Africa is the only zone right now in the world that still held 60%, of the available land for agriculture. So we have demand here, incredible amount of demand. We have a huge shortage of production and supply, yet nobody is thinking about centralizing the demand and building by pool. I'm looking at Heike because she loves that. She's the finance lady. Whenever actually the demand is secured, the funding is there. But nobody came and said, okay, I need 10 million tons of this product. Secure me the land through 3 or 4 African countries. And then you have 2 or 3 companies actually that will bring actually the production, others the irrigation, others actually the fertilizers, and others will do the logistics. While it seems to be the easiest thing and the most logical thing to do. What prevents actually Europe from doing such a thing while it's in need actually of the development of its supplies of agriculture right now?
I think what's happened, I mean, there are individual companies who play the supply chain very well. There's one Irish company, Fifes, they produce, look after most of the bananas in the world. They operate out of Ireland and we don't grow bananas. So they do it by going all over the world, building the base, providing the storage, bringing the bananas back for ripening into the European Union. And, you know, so it can be done. Is there many, and they've been doing this for a quarter of a century. Is there enough of companies doing that? There are individual companies doing that. To answer your question, I do not think that the European Commissioner for Agriculture will do this. The people who will do this will be the private sector, who see the opportunity, and they will convince the Commission that providing they live by the standards of the health and hygiene of European Union, that then they will support it. But it will be the private sector that will take those projects. And they do it for flowers, as you know, they do quite successfully. But I think for the food chain, it will be the private sector will do it.
Thank you for this beacon. Private sector, Zoran, you are a defender also of this role. Jibril also, of course, Heike. So in 1 minute each, how can the private sector, in a responsible manner, in a sustainable manner, contribute to fill actually this gap? Let's say for agriculture, and then we take it to other sectors.
Okay, may I go first? I'll try to be in 1 minute, but I'm not sure that I will be able.
You are fine.
You know, we are speaking about this concept of impact investment. How we can define the impact investment is investing which allow allocation of the capital for providing a profit to the investor, but as well to provide social benefit for the community. That is a very important concept, and in order that concept to work, we need both sides. What the Prime Minister mentioned, we need on one side the private sector being ready to invest, and I believe that they are more and more willing to do that. And on the other side is what Prime Minister mentioned, the legal environment for that investment. And that should be done in dialogue between investors and societies where they're investing. Also, they should define, we spoke about food, but there are some other needs of the people. If we can match them, it could be provided very, very huge impact. I will share with you, I spent last school year at Harvard, and I was seeing students wearing a certain jacket. And I went to buy it because it was, I want to be like them. And I saw the price is double than the others, and it's written 100% from recycled plastic. And I went to talk to them, and I said, why are you buying these jackets? They say, we are caring about future of the planet. We would like to provide the maximum benefit from the resources what we are having. Those are future leaders, and the more and more from the companies, they will demand that they invest responsibly, as well as I mentioned before, sustainable development goals. And food security, fight against hunger, green energy is part of those goals. And some of them, I had discussion with my colleagues, fellows, and professors and students. They're speaking, the companies should not just report to stock exchange about their profits and turnovers, but also they should start reporting what they have done for sustainable development goals, for what they have done for inclusion, for women equality. So we are entering into a new era, which some of them are saying reimagining of the capitalism. Profit is there, the companies should work for profit, but also we should keep them responsible for the needs of the world. And now we are facing huge demand for food, and we need to do something.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Jolewski. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Dr. Hagmacht.
So try to stay in a minute, and since I agree with everything that my predecessor has said, I don't think a government has ever produced a good cake or has, grown an efficient crop. It's always been the ingenuity of the private sector, from, a small farmer to a large conglomerate to a cooperative, through the whole value chain. So I think if you stay with food production, this has always been intrinsically a private sector activity. The ingenuity and innovation of how to increase yields, how to water better, how to use efficient fertilizer, all of this is the interface of many private players. So I think what governments need to do is give, the frameworks for these companies to grow, to develop, but I think this is a private endeavor, really first and foremost. And I do believe that, if we give enough room for companies to grow, we give them the right investment and some of the regulation, I think also in terms of crisis, I think companies are not the ones that want to shut borders in times of crisis. Companies will always be the ones that want to keep borders open, that want to continue to trade, that want to continue to buy and sell inputs of food products. So I believe, the private sector has a large role to play in keeping trade open, and in particular in growing food, and in times of crisis to help to be resilient. So I think that's quintessential, the private sector.
Amazing. Seems that everybody agrees on the role of the private sector. Let's applaud the private sector, but also let's applaud my dear friend, Mrs. Heike. Dr. Jibril, please, Professor.
Well, your question, strangely enough, links back to the original rhetoric of sovereignty and integration. When the Russia-Ukraine war started, we had the problem of the 3 Fs: fertilizer, food, and fuel. And that shows us that within the integration, there is always a risk to sovereignty. In that those are affected, everyone's panicking, thus they need 75% to get off from Russia. So that tension and balance is always there, which is the reason, which gives us a hint as to why private sector tends to be more effective. Because they understand this more than anyone else. They understand, and now they don't even think about it. It's instinctive. They understand product life cycle. That progression is not a straight upward curve. It's ellipsis. It goes up and down. So in everything they do, they integrate renewal and redevelopment. Thus you have the semblance of an upward curve, but the drops are happening, but being mitigated. This is why they are more effective virtually than anyone else. But within this effectiveness comes power and ruthlessness that needs to be checked by the international standards. We forget now that the mightiest of the modern empires we had were started by private companies. The mighty British Empire was started by a private company that effectively colonized.
The British East Indian Company.
Absolutely. And of course the Dutch East India Company, the very first. So if you then say Africa have the land to produce the food.
Little spot, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Because in the education system in Morocco, very few, I know it's actually must study in the UK and elsewhere, but very few knew about the British East Indian Company and about the Verin, its sister competitor company, that is from Holland.
Yes.
They built most of what we know today about maritime law, about finance, about stock exchange markets. My God, they even owned their own armies, their own currencies, and they were running almost their own flags at a certain time.
Yes.
So please, for all the students and all the youth in the room, study about those two. You will understand lots of the reality of the economy today and maybe of tomorrow. Please carry on, Jibril.
Thank you. It's that effectiveness that needs to be admired in some sense, in that it works, but one needs to bear the responsibility that goes with it. So plantations and big agri-businesses in Africa are old, and they are not loved. because they are servicing the metropolis. They're not necessarily servicing it. But I think I had mention of cooperatives and other methods. There must be, I'm not saying that you have to get rid of this efficient machine. One would be foolish to do that. But one must be plural so that no single type have overwhelming dominance so as to abuse. And that is what happens now. Africa is very interested and worried in illicit financial transfers, movement, billions. In fact, sometimes when we talk of aid, we say, well, just stop stealing. You know, you don't have to give us aid, just stop what you're stealing from us. That would be enough. So in my sense, this classical model of getting these very efficient, ruthless companies to come and do the production is fraught with danger. The model has to be changed even beyond the current standard of impact funding. So impact funding should be, financing should be a bigger part of the ecology, and new and older ones like the cooperatives should be within that ecology as well, without getting rid of the rampant capitalist, as it were. Thank you.
It's very interesting to listen to you, and we can only imagine those multinationals based on what you are describing. I was managing director of many actually in the past. But how can we trim, in the same time give them more dynamic to play a real core role in the development of the world today, but in the same time trim potential harm? Because this is what we are talking about if we want actually to be blunt.
You know, in terms of the state, in the modern history, the state having control of private enterprise without killing it, I think the United States have been the example of how best to do it. China, I'm not too sure, because some of the institutions are controlled by the state. In my view, when you resolve that this is the good thing, there is little debate, you impose it.
Okay.
When, in the early part of the 20th century, the mighty companies were the seven sisters of petroleum.
Of course.
They became so powerful, everything from research, mining, all the way to retail, very powerful. It became bad for everyone. And the state came, that's where the anti-competition laws came in, and said, we will break you. We hear of the brand Esso, that's originally Standard Oil. We break you. With the tech companies as well, we remember Microsoft when they were going to dominate the browser market. They came and stopped it, and you had innovation. By that time, nobody could even imagine Google would happen. So it's that sort of radicalism. But you know, United States does it well. For United States, there is virtually nobody else that does it for the rest of the world. WTO does not have the teeth. But one has to find then within the sovereign states or the regional groups for them to do that sort of what I call enlightened imposition of some sense and order. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Minister.
I fully agree with what Professor has said. And I would like to add something which is a very important tool of the government, which is taxation. And when I say taxation, it's innovative taxation, which means we'll encourage the practices and policies of the companies and consumers to consume the goods and production that will reduce the harm reduction concept. If the consumers consume the products which then can harm their health, it's natural to be taxed higher. If the company does not produce, does not protect the environment, is not using the resources appropriately, efficiently, it should be higher taxes. So the innovative taxation, together with harm reduction, is important element for a future well-being of our
if
countries.
I want to translate it, we can encourage big multinationals that distribute food, to not name any brand, fast food, for example, that if they buy tomatoes or onions coming from West African, East African, South African, Central African countries, North African, to not make anybody angry, okay, with certain conditions such as big part should be produced by women, big part should be produced by poor people, local value creation, certain quality, etc., automatically they get tax cuts and benefits.
Yes, correct. Also, the to encourage the producers to produce more healthy products, to work together with producers, because that will create for them, because for them it's easier to buy the products originally, but also they have to work with the producers.
And even vertically, I can see actually multinationals working with local conglomerates, but working also with small and middle-sized actually companies. So we can secure that the entire locomotive, the entire train is moving and not just big parts of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the end result will be increased productivity, more healthy nation, so it's a benefit for all.
Beautiful. So now actually we have the process, we have the funding, we have the way how multinationals should work with local conglomerates, with SMEs, we have the demand. Antonio, why should they come to Africa?
So I think that they should come to Africa, because there's no such a place with such ingredients, in such a moment that you could maximize your gains. Not in a perspective that you'll be taking everything out of it, but to make it win-win. And there, when you ask if what is the role of the private sector, I believe that the private sector will come where the public sector has created the conditions. So my fellow panelists have mentioned the conditions. I will not repeat it, but it's important to have good governance. It's important to have the right legal framework, the right fiscal incentives, and then to advertise like I'm doing. So with all that, I guess the future is bright. Thank you.
Amazing. I will not make a conclusion. I will ask actually our valuable guests to make actually 1 minute of final remarks each. Then we want to listen, don't we, to the public, to their questions as well, and interact with them. So, Mrs. Heike, you were the last one to intervene at the first round. Please be the first one.
Difficult to conclude on this sort of incredibly rich panel, but so maybe I conclude with what I started with, and on sort of seeing is believing, and being in a place which has really transformed the trade globally, and in particular starting with the trade with Africa, and then globally in such a short period of time, sort of seeing the immense power of digitalization and greening trade has been really transformatory. So I leave with seeing is believing.
Thank you very much. Zoran, please.
Okay, you know, about 15 years ago, Thomas Friedman published a book, The World is Flat, which means there is opportunity for all of us. Now with new technology, new digital technology, green energy, it could be game changer, and it will create opportunity for all of us. Only we need to prepare the next generations to be ready to absorb new technologies and to use them.
100%. Thank you very much. Prime Minister.
There may be problems for young people in this generation and the rising generation with globalization, but there's one thing that is unquestionable, that everybody has the same knowledge. Through technology, people know what's happening everywhere else, and the opportunities are clear. And I believe in what we've heard from your good country and what you're doing, that there's that opportunity to really, maybe because of war, maybe because of, you know, the way inflation, interest rates have taken off for the first time in a generation, that a new set of opportunities arise. And it seems from what we've been hearing these last days here, that opportunity is here. The only thing I'd add into what you have said, but because I listened to the session this morning, which was very good on security, I think you have to add in the security. I come from a country that suffered for a long time, where we didn't get our business going and we didn't get our companies going and we couldn't get investment. And I did road shows from my country into America, and the only one question, no matter how hard I worked, the first question people wanted to ask me, how was the war, how was the trouble? And, you know, it was always deflating. And I think, you know, I have to be honest, that, and having listened to a very honest debate this morning, we have to add that issue, because that's something that has to be resolved, because the money follows, good governance, good governments, peaceful situation, not over bureaucracy, and fairness, and all of these things have to come in the mix together. But it seems that there are very ripe opportunities.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you for your insight. Thank you also, Mr. Minister, Mrs. Managing Director, Mr. Chairman.
So I'll be very short. Let's talk less about potential and let's focus more on materialization of the same. Thank you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Professor.
To diversify the ecology of economic and entrepreneurial players in Africa particularly, that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for this wonderful session. We are on time. We should be applauded, actually. We are on time, and since I see my dear brother, Mr. Monkey, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Senegal, Special Envoy of Mr. Guterres, and we don't want Special Envoy to be waiting, and him and also actually the other speakers, I will have a suggestion. We continue the discussion around the questions after actually the session is over, but I have actually to say a couple of words. While listening to you inspired me personally, because we didn't go through actually classical discussion, we really built through actually common thoughts with respect to the diversity of each other, our background, but also our interests. And this is how actually South-North cooperation should be, in respect actually of saying clearly actually what are our interests, but being open for creative ideas. We moved from a world of excess to a world of stress. We moved from a world where we used, to establish vision strategies on 15 years, allocate resources, modelize those resources, plan them, and by the time actually that we were able or going actually to make them in the field, the entire paradigm changed. But guess what? We were in excess. We had enough resources, right? And we were controlling the world. Today, we can't. We're in a world actually of complete change. We live that every day. So the game has changed also. Today, the game is between the hands of those, ladies and gentlemen, people, organizations, states, multinational structures, SMEs, groups of influences that have the ability to survive. Survive first. Then succeed. Then transform weakness into opportunity. Wasn't that our introduction? But it's not enough. They need to be recognized internationally as the ones that succeeded. And then comes power. Power today comes from influence. You realize on the field, then you are recognized as the one that succeeded, then we modelize and we rally to you. That's the world where we live today. And I loved actually what you said in your beginning, Heike. You need to see in order to believe. That's what human beings are about. Thank you for this wonderful session. Thank you for building together such an inspiration to the room. And thank you for being such an excellent panel. Thank you for being such an excellent public also. We continue the discussion later on. One final picture, actually, official picture with your permission.